Greetings, Brother Beniti back with another post. Today we're going to talk about, continue the discussion on magic. Today we're going to talk about divination, dealing with oracles, the mystic voice of the gods or the spirits, whatever term you want to get into. There's different terminologies and explanations for it. So we're going to talk a little bit today about some of those methods, how those methods are done. Obviously in various different cultures you have methods. For example, in the Yoruba culture in West Africa, you have the reading of the cowrie shells. You have the reading of the Ifa tray from the Babalawo, which is an oracle. You have stones, you have runes. Some people use tarot cards. So there's different methods or tools of divination that can be used, or oracles that can be used in working magic and communicating with the spirit. So we're going to talk about some of them. Those are just a couple to throw out there quick. We're going to talk about a little bit about the history, where some of this goes back, some practical methods on how it's worked, things of that nature. So let's start a little bit about the oracle, working with the spirits. It says, among the ancient Greeks, gods were real and manifest, endowed with human attributes, visible in human form. They dwelt in the clouds, in the forests, in the fields, in the valleys. They congregated on lofty Mount Olympus. They haunted rivers and springs and secluded fastnesses. Always they were in contact with mortals who were anxious to render the veil of fate. Always they communed and communicated with man, and man was invariably eager to discover the significance of those provocative communications, to pierce through into the will of the deities. When man was perplexed, and to the ancient Greeks all life was a sequence with interludes of hazards and alarms, he appeared for direction and spiritual guidance to these divinities. The response of the god at the instance of the beseechant or the visitant was the oracle. So this was the tool that was used. The oracle was the voice of the deity, thundering upon man, steering him to a fated destination at any given moment through a dilemma, through the perils confronting him. Throughout Greece, there were special shrines dedicated to the oracular revelations associated with particular deities. Asclepius, god of healing, was consulted at the valley girt. Epidaurus, Zeus, almighty ruler of the universe, had shrines at Olympia. Then it goes on for an example to name some of the other deities, etc. So here we see, even when going back, and we're going to go even further back and take it to Egypt, you could start as recent as Egypt. As recent as Greece, which actually they stole everything from Egypt, which we know. But the one thing to point out that's critical in that statement is the representation of deity and how deity was always seen in every aspect of nature, creation, in man, and the personification of the climate. All of that connected to deity, and the relation of that to oneself or subconscious mind. In order to work real magic, one has to understand those formulas that what's your role, your place, if you're working with certain magical elements. Not to separate it from outside of yourself, but how you're able to connect those elements and make it work for you, okay? Then it goes on to say there were four major ways of divining the will of the gods. There were interpretation of dreams. Let's talk a little bit about this. Through the agency of trained priests and diviners. There were the necromantic evocation of the spirits of the dead. And this is where this word comes up. The Greek word necromantic, or necro, is where they get the Latin word negro. And this is actually what this actually means. It means dead, or dead spirits. So another thing to look at the origin of that word that's thrown around, people use, but not to get into that whole political nonsense. Then it goes on to say, divination was also practiced by the means of signs, such as the clashing of brazen cymbals, the rustling of oak leaves, drawing lots, examination of the entrails of sacrificial victims. But the most widespread method was consultation of the oracle, the spoken will of the god. There were, of course, techniques and rituals involving the approach of the god, the ministrations of the priests, the significance, and the responses themselves. Okay, so we see the oracle When these oracles were consulted, whatever method of divination one was using, there was a certain system. There were certain symbols or symbology that was represented in the symbols. And a deviant or a priest had to be one that was skilled in interpreting those symbols. Now, to back up for a minute, when it mentions dreams being another form of divination, I want to make this clear, because you're going to get a lot of people, and you might have, or you will, excuse me, people always come to you and tell you they had a dream, or they tell you about a dream. And what that basically means is you can only give your interpretation of the breakdown of the dream, but when somebody tries to give you their sole exclusive interpretation of the dream, as if they can completely prove what that dream means, that can become dangerous, because forms of divination and interpretations of dreams, really the main person that has to interpret that dream is the individual that had the dream. Okay? Doesn't mean you can't get advice, doesn't mean you can't get instruction, it doesn't mean you can't get theory. But theory in itself comes from the Greek word theos, which is just that. It's a theory. It can't be proven, because the only person that's going to come to the conclusion of what that dream really was and how it to be interpreted, again, is the individual that had the dream. So you got to be careful, because you have people out there claiming that they can interpret dreams, and sometimes they can give misleading information and lead people down the wrong path. So that's something you need to definitely be cautious and be on guard for. There's a way, though, the individual can interpret the dream by taking note of the symbology. So what I tend to tell some people sometimes, a good thing to do is try to recall as much of the dream that you can, if there's any symbols in it, any signs, anything that stood out about it. Write those down. If you can't remember everything, sometimes it's good to keep a dream journal so you can keep track of some of these experiences when you can't recall them all, and really focus on the symbology and the signs and the symbols that were in the dream, and meditate and focus on them, and you will find out the interpretations will come through strong and clear, and you'll get a vaster understanding and an understanding of what the spirit definitely is trying to communicate to you. Now remember, that's what dreams are. It's a tool of divination, for lack of a better word, of your connection and communication, one of the many, with the spirit world. So our dreams are very important. Now remember, the dreams, for the most part, are usually symbolic. It doesn't, usually, for an example, people will say something crazy happened in my dream. You might see a death. Doesn't literally mean that you're physically going to die. It just means you might be going through, for an example, a transitional period in your life where one phase of your life is dying out and you're going into another phase. So that's symbolic. Sometimes it's presented in certain imagery to try to get that point across. So that's why interpreting dreams has to be a lot of meditation and focus on the symbols and really the meaning of the dream and what it represented. So dreams are one aspect. So as it mentioned that up there, I wanted to clarify that, because over the years I hear people, they just come in with some crazy shit, and they want you to basically explain their personal experience, and you have to be careful with that. That's a little bit different than using a system of divination or oracle, which as termed in some explanations, of the mouthpiece of the spirits or the gods, where you're breaking down the symbols, the interpretations, and the signs of what they mean, which define a clear communication of what the spirit is trying to instruct that person in. That's different. So we need to understand that. So be careful of soothsayers and people that claim that they can explain your personal experience. They really can't. They can only give you advice, information, and guidance, but only you, the person that had the experience, is able to actually put that into perspective. All right, so let's come down here. Let me skip around here, so get to some more important points. All right. Now, dealing with people. Or the types of diviners or divination, or people that can practice divination, as we mentioned earlier. You have people, as I mentioned in the beginning, that use different cultural aspects of divination. All right, so let's start first with the Yoruba culture. Okay, in the Yoruba culture, depending on what version you're practicing of it, let's also establish that, because most of the people in the United States of America practice the watered down aspect of it, which is prominent in the Latin and the Haitian communities in the United States of America, where they have infused Catholicism / Christianity in with the Yoruba culture. To give a brief background on that, reason for that, basically why it works. Most people probably are familiar with it. Those that aren't, when you see these, what they call these botanicas all over the country, and they're prominent in big cities like, Miami, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, etc. You'll see these botanical religious stores with a lot of these images of the Catholic icons or the Catholic saints, which just mask the representation of these so-called Yoruba deities such as Shango, Obatala, Yemaya, Ogun, etc. Now, the reason for that is a brief history of how the Yoruba culture became so prominent amongst people in the Caribbean, who then have now brought that, the Latino and the Caribbean community have brought that to America over the last 100 years or so. Stems from the Portuguese slave masters, who basically enslaved the Africans, and when the Africans were enslaved, they basically practiced this false brand of Christianity. For an example, they would venerate the Saint Barbara, who had the same colors as the deity Shango, red and white. So they would trick the slave master into thinking they were venerating Santa Barbara or Saint Barbara, but they were actually venerating the deity Shango. Just like the various aspects of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Our Lady of Caridad del Cobra in Cuba, which is actually a synchronization of the deity Oshun. The same goes for Yemaya, with various aspects of the Blessed Virgin Mary concept, Obatala with the Holy Spirit, etc. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So this was done to disguise or mask the worship of these Orishi, or Orisha as some pronounce, these Yoruba deities. Now, the problem is it's taken away from the purity of how the culture was practiced, because there's been a lot of, again, Christianity and Catholicism infused in it for those that practice the brand of it called Santeria. It's not in its pure form, which basically is a Latin word which just means way of the saints. So you have a lot of people that practice this culture, and again, it's a mixture of Catholicism or Catholic Christian beliefs mixed in with African concepts. And you'll have people in those religions that practice the divination, the male ones called Santeros and the female ones called Santeras, and they use different forms of divination. They will read, again, the cowrie shells. They will cast the coconut, or as they call obi. They will read, sometimes called coffee cups, or the dominoes, read cards. Again, it's an infusion of many of these different divination systems. Now, some are authentic in the sense that the one that has conditioned themselves, regardless male or female, that has opened themselves up to spirit, the results actually can determine if that person is genuine, real, and what they're doing is actually supported by the results. But you do also have people that are full of shit and kind of can mesmerize and bind people and kind of control them and keep them coming back for various methods, and usually it's for financial gain. So be cautious of that. Now, you'll find a lot of that in what they call Santeria. When going back to the purer version of divination in the Yoruba culture, which is Ifa, and you'll find the Babalawo who use the Dilagoon, which are the chains and the cowrie shells, or the Ifa tray, which is broken down into over 256 what they call odus. And the Babalawo has to study and master each one of those symbols, and when he's casting or doing divination for an individual, those symbols are drawn up on the Ifa tray and then interpreted for the person that the divination is being done, and they claim to be in contact with the highest aspect of consciousness in the Yoruba pantheon of Ifa called Olorun. Okay, and that would represent the vast consciousness of the divine, not so much a deity, though sometimes those who water it down presented as a deity, but it represents consciousness. So that gets into a higher form of divination when using those systems. Okay, that's just in that culture. Okay, and again, we could be here talking about that, for hours. So that is the systems in a brief summarization of oracles of divination that are used in the Orisha culture. Now, you also have, back in ancient Egypt, the reading of these stones of the runes. When you get into the coming forth by day, remember, most of those, what they call spells or formulae, as you read the coming forth by day, were invocations to invoke the spirits, were invocations to activate the energy and the consciousness to speak to the spirits. Now, what I mean by that is you have a lot of people, for an example, today that study Egyptology. So now we're going to leave the Yoruba culture in West Africa, and we're going to go to Egypt real quick. You have a lot of people that, Egypt seems to be the in thing now over the last 10, 15 years. And over the last several years, everybody's into Egypt. Everybody studies Egypt now. Everybody's an Egyptologist. They read books on Egypt. Everything is black this, black that, blah, 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 all that other garbage. People talk about Tahuti and Amun-Ra, and they want to get into the historical aspects of Egypt, which is all wonderful. But you don't hear anybody talking about, can they invoke the energy of the spirit of Tahuti? And as we went over a couple classes back, invoking and evoking the spirits or the entities, which would be a system of divination of working with that particular spirit. One has to tap into the conscious energy or the archetype energy that spirit represents. Now, one can do that by different formulae, incantations, or certain chants, for lack of a better word, by summoning the presence of that deity. Now, there's steps and preparations. For an example, when one would go into a sacred space, whether it's a temple, whether it's a personal shrine, or their own personal sacred place, first they would do what they would call banishing. Okay? Now, I think I mentioned, if I didn't, maybe we'll go over that another time. I believe a few classes back, I mentioned a book by Israel Regardie called The Middle Pillar. And we'll maybe go over that next time. It breaks down the correct system of how to start the process of invoking the spirits. Because first, you have to banish all negative energy that is in that space. So you first do a banishing before you do an invoking when working with some of these spirits or deities. And then certain incantations draw them down. And you have to always be focused on the intent of why you're trying to communicate or draw down these spirits. Now, I want to be crystal clear on this. When working with systems of divination or invoking the spirits or incantations, it doesn't work where you can call one of them down, for example, and think they're going to cure all your money problems. That's not how it works. When invoking them, remember, especially for personal situations on the physical level, one must first establish that they attempted to try everything within their power to get the result that they wanted. Now, when they've accomplished that and they've exhausted those means, then that individual can try to petition for a deity to assist them. Now, when one petitions the deity for higher states of consciousness, that's when usually deity or the spirits will respond. So it doesn't work on personal gain. It works more in the sense, if you talk about the system of, for an example, of Egyptian Ma'at back in ancient Egypt, and that's supposed to represent balance or justice. When one is seeking that, and that's the intent, because when working with spiritual magic, remember, it's always about what is the intent that's driving the action. So if the intent is personal greed, 9 out of 10 times it's not going to work. If the intent is personal revenge, now you have people that work magical practices, and some call it black magic or voodoo, and I don't like to use those terms, especially the word voodoo, because people have spooked it the fuck out, and they got these Hollywood interpretations of it and all this negative shit. But when you try to use magic to harm somebody out of pure revenge, and especially if you're in the wrong, now you're opening yourself up to what we call different states of karma. And 9 out of 10 times when working with magic, you have to understand universal law and how that works. What you send out, you get back. So if you're sending out something that's off-centered or imbalanced, that energy will come back to you. And the universe, which the law of the universe, of just our universal realm, we know there's multiverses, we're not going to get into that, states which precedes physical or man-made law, is that the universe must balance itself out. So if you are an individual that is creating an imbalance, because if you're creating an imbalance within the subconscious mind, that energy will definitely come back to you, and it necessarily always doesn't come back the same way. So that's why I say it's important to understand the intent that's driving the magical working or the magical purpose that you're putting in to practice. And this can be done by various means. Now, other levels of invoking spirit and incantations for healing purposes, which tends to be a powerful invocation and communicating with the deity or the spirits, or using systems of divination for healing purposes, which that involves intense study and first and foremost understanding the body. For an example, you'll find out that most physical ailments are tapped into what we call the ganglion nerves, which run from the trunk of the neck down the spine. There's different nerve centers that you'll find that you're able to give what they call positive and negative treatments to, by assistance and invocation of the spirits, to heal certain ailments. You can keep yourself in line by understanding how the sympathetic nervous system works, the autonomic nervous system, etc. Different breathing techniques, which now deals more with healing systems of magic. One key in that, though, and you'll find out why most people are sick or get a lot of sicknesses or are not in tune, is they don't know how to breathe properly. I know that sounds crazy. That might sound crazy to some people. But most people, you'll find, are mouth breathers. They don't know how to correctly breathe in through the nose and exhale out through the nose. You'll find most people, and I'm not just talking about people that sleep and snore and breathe out of their mouth. I'm talking about people that are regularly mouth breathers, because if they understand how the circulatory system works and how the lungs filter out this negativity or this negative energy, they would know it's done through the nose, not through the mouth. Which breathing through the mouth creates all types of bacteria and different diseases. So when you go back into ancient Egyptian culture, you'll find out that breathing, even in Japanese and Asian cultures, which you call it Tai Chi, or working with the Chi. In Egypt, they call it the Sekhem, which is actually a Greek word. The last 46 dynasties called it that, not the ancient Egyptians. The Sekhem would be the same thing as the Chi amongst the various different Asian cultures. And one was always taught to activate that Chi. Okay? So when the Chi is activated correctly, one would be spiritually in tune. So there's ways to activate that through different divination processes or connecting with deities or spirits that specifically deal with healing, such as, for an example, if one wanted to contact Khonsu for healing purposes. You'll find out when you do your research about the deity Khonsu that most ancient Egyptians, in their place where they lived, they would have an image of Khonsu, because Khonsu represented that great healing physician, or that great healing spirit. And when the ancient Egyptians invoked healing magic, they would invoke the spirit of Khonsu. So you can do invocations to the deity Khonsu for physical ailments, right? The list goes on and on and on and on and on. Again, we can bounce around to a multitude of different cultures. Now, we started in the beginning with the Greeks because I wanted to show, just in that beginning, I didn't want to read through a bunch of that Greek garbage, because that shit is boring as hell. If you read through all that, you fall asleep reading through it. I just go to show you that system, when you read in modern day Greek, what they call mythology, you'll see it was a watered down version of the whole Egyptian mystery system, which most people know that. But pay attention in particular to the Greek deities and what correlation they have to the Egyptian deities. But the theme and the process of it was the same: the representation of the deities, the different aspects of energy they represented, and how it tied into nature, creation, and more importantly, how it related to self. So the point being is, one has to understand all these things to work what we call spiritual magic, or what we call pure black magic. And I like to use that term because, again, people are stupid when they hear that term, because most people, again, are indoctrinated what Hollywood calls black magic. Because if you hear me say the word black magic, and the first thoughts that come to your mind, again, is devil worship, Satanism, and satanic devil rituals, then you don't understand what real black magic is. And as I've said a multitude of times, real black magic is the manipulation of the subconscious mind. And what manipulation of the subconscious mind means is, meaning, when you go into a magical working, first and foremost, for it to work, you must already go into it declaring victory. Do you understand that? If you're trying to overcome an obstacle, you must go into it already before you begin, with the obstacle already being defeated. That's the type of way one would strengthen or manipulate the subconscious mind to work for it, or for themselves, as opposed to against itself. Now, to show you that that is a fact, whether you want to accept it or not, it's the same process when one constantly thinks negative, or constantly always thinks failure thoughts, or constantly thinks something bad is going to happen to them. What eventually happens? For an example, if you set out to do a business venture, or you're playing a sport and you've been struggling, and say you're a baseball player, you're getting ready to go up to the plate, and you keep thinking, man, I'm not playing well right now, I'm going to strike out. What's going to happen 9 out of 10 times? You're going to strike out. If you go into a business dealing and you're investing and you're worried about losing your money, and you're focusing more of your energy on losing the money than you are being successful at the business dealing, guess what's going to happen? The business dealing is going to fail, and you are going to lose your money. Because basically what you are doing is defeating yourself before you even begin, by way of manipulating the subconscious mind. But that would be doing it in an adverse way that would work against you. This is what real magic is. It's not just about the spooky interpretation that you get of it, okay? It doesn't deal with that. So when we deal with the occult and spiritual magic, and that's what we deal with, that's what this is about. This is not about, and I've never been about that, and we don't do this show, and we don't do the radio show Awaken Universal Minds so we can sit there and lecture to you how great you are and how black you are back in ancient Egypt, because that's a bunch of egotistical bullshit. And that's usually a crutch that people use to lean on to make themselves feel good, so they can remove themselves from everyday reality. That's not what this is about. This is about being a practicing or a practical magician that actually, or a magi or magas, whatever term you need to use to get you through the day. This is about actually using practical magical methods, or putting the information into practice. We're not armchair magicians, meaning we don't sit in our chair and read books and just pretend to be what we're reading. We actually become what we're reading. That's the difference. So I keep telling people, and that's why I don't bother answering emails when people want to get into nonsense conversations about the historical aspect of Egypt and Africa, that we're past that shit. So I don't sit there and waste my time and energy. I don't care who was first, number one. I don't care what dynasty came before. That's irrelevant to me. I would simply ask the person. You're mentioning all these deities. You're mentioning all these cultures. But rather than talking about that, how can you put that information into practice? Other than the fact that you want to talk about it historically. So we're past that. One that deals with metaphysics and the occult and magic uses these principles to alter the energy around them to work in their favor. You understand that? To work in their favor. And not only does it just work in your favor and make you a better individual, but it makes everybody else around you better individuals. That's what this is about. That's what real spiritual magic is about. So to kind of sum it up and close it up in a nutshell, and again, I think what we'll focus on the next show will be candle magic. I think we'll specifically focus on that in detail. That'll be a good show. We'll kind of get more in depth of how to work different candle magic practices. So invoking the deity can be done in a multitude of way of as far as dealing with systems of divination. Again, I named just a few. There's many more. There's crystal gazing. There's reading the stones, as I said earlier, Egyptian runes. These would be oracles or systems of divination. They are real. They are deal with magic. But again, the practitioner working them has to be authenticated first for that magical system to work and be put into place. Now, I also want to stress this. Know when you're consulting those systems of divination, you're basically just consulting your higher self. The person doing it for you is just being a vessel and kind of tapping in to your higher superconsciousness and what spirits and energies that you're connected with. Now, this is real. Some people are afraid to or don't want to go that route because they don't want to deal with the higher aspect of self. But this is a reality. You don't have to accept it or believe it. You need to experience it for yourself, because experience is the greatest thing that can confirm things. So that's what these practical systems of magic, or oracles and consulting the deity, really ties into, and it's about. So I think we're going to stop there, and again, next week I think we'll focus on candle magic and how to work with candles and colors and things of that nature, which again are other systems or tools of divination that one can use to petition and invoke the spirits and the deities. Okay. Well, actually, no, let me repeat that. Next week won't be candle magic because we will be posting the class that we're doing next week. Forgot about that. So let me rephrase that. There'll be a post going up late next Saturday night after we do the lecture in the class that we're doing this Saturday night in Miami at Sophia's Garden of Matt. That's Saturday, November 14th, 7:30 p.m. at Sophia's Garden of Maat. If you are interested in coming to that event, you can email me at khnum19@gmail.com, and I will send you the address and the information for that event. The event is free. There's no charge to get in. We just ask to you support the vendors that are there at the event. Support Sister Sophia, who runs the place and holds different events there. And I myself will be out there with a ton of books and products that you can pick up. So if you're in the Miami area and you're able to attend, that's this Saturday night, November 14th, starts at 7:30 p.m. No charge to get in. If you're interested in spiritual consultation or same thing that we discussed in this lecture, a form of divination or oracle, you can contact me. That's a service that we provide, again at the same email address, khnum19@gmail.com, and we can set up an appointment to do that. That's basically it. That's what I got for you now. So next week we'll post that class up. And then maybe the following week we'll go into the candle magic. I forgot that we have that class. And usually what we do is we record the class that we do, or a lecture we do, and that would be the upload for the week. So that class will be the upload for next week, which usually is a few hours. So it's usually a nice class, anywhere from 2 to 3 hours roughly. Usually it's 2.5, somewhere in between. But anyway, you've seen those. And we'll have some drumming out there as usual. We've been recording some short drumming sessions, posting them up, because that's another important thing. which we haven't even gotten into that form of ritualistic and spiritual aspect, the drums. And if you've seen some of the videos we posted, a lot of us are, intently into the drumming because that is an important aspect and another important instrument of communication with the spirits and the deities, that works on different rhythms and vibrations and sound. And there's certain rhythms that invoke the spirits and the deities too, especially in certain cultures where you have certain specific rhythms and patterns that are designed for each deity. Now, you also find out in these cultures, some of the sacred drummers that play for in these cultures have to go through their own special initiatory or initiation process. They have to be tried, proven, and worthy to play for these deities themselves too. That's a whole nother system. So by all means, the drum is one of the most powerful tools. Real music, not this fake ass shit you're listening to now. Real music. We're talking about core instruments that go back to the ancestors: the cowrie bells, the talking drum, the djembes, the djembe, the congas. These were all natural instruments that had a spiritual connection, and we'll kind of get into that. So we've been putting some of the drumming sessions up so you can hear some of the different rhythms and instruments and patterns, because it's another thing that we don't see in a lot of these conscious cultures. Again, we're not just about sitting there spitting off a bunch of historical information, which we want to show you some of the magical practices. And if we're talking about it, we want to give you some practical applications on how to do that. Now, one can, again, also learn, and I'm not going to do that, openly. Again, if, for an example, you do a consultation, some people want to get into specific how to set up altars and shrines and certain systems of ancestral worship. But that's something that can definitely be done, which is important. These are all important aspects of working with the higher self or the superconscious mind. So it's about teaching and instructing the adept to become a master and become a master magician and work that spiritual magic for themselves. But the greatest gift one can do when they get that knowledge is pass that information on to somebody else. That's called creating change. So people want to know, how can we change things? Well, we can change things by giving people practical solutions for that change. If you can teach individuals how to change the energy around them, how to control the forces of nature and balance them out where they can work for the betterment of that individual, as opposed to pumping their head up with a bunch of bullshit about how great they were in Egypt, because that don't work to the drug dealer that's out on the street. That don't work to the poor person that's struggling to find their next meal. They don't need a history lesson. You understand? You don't need to tell them how great or how black they were back in ancient Egypt, because that false sense of pride is only going to take them so far. But if you can teach that person a system where they can get their life back in order and control their destiny in their life and better their life and those around them, that's a whole nother level. See, nobody's talking about that shit. Everybody wants to tell you how black you were and the black man was God and blah, 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 all that bullshit, and get up there and just spit rhetoric. If that's your thing, that's your thing. But those that are working the occult and the magic don't need to have to go out of their way like ignorant people in the intellectual community do. They need to show everybody what they know. They got to prove to everybody what they know and how much history they know, because it pumps their ego up, so they need to show everybody what they know. A real master magician, a real spiritual warrior, moves in silence. It's unnecessary. A real magician doesn't have to show everything they know. They take their adepts and their students and they teach them, and their adepts and students teach them and move on to their own students and teach them, and they do it in a way with dignity, grace, and humbleness. But on the same token, if you fuck with the magician the wrong way, there's also other forces of energy and power that the magician can work with for their benefit. So don't want to paint the picture that the spiritual magician or practitioner is a pussy, because by all means they're not. They work with higher levels of energy and spirits or deity, whatever term you need to get you through. But anyway, so that's what we got going on. Again, you got the email address khnum19@gmail.com, and that's all I got for now. And we will see you when we put the next post up next Saturday. Peace.